Okay, I think we can start now. The official introduction. Welcome to Rabbi Eric Grossman. A pleasure to have you back for Torah Motion. Rabbi Grossman actually spoke on Parshat Bo, which ties into Pesach very well, and gave a fascinating shiur on the development on the various Pesachs. Just not going to Pesach change over the years. I really think it's really a wonderful shiur. If you want to go back to Parshat Bo, tonight, as we begin Parshat Vayikra, 8:30 tonight, we'll have a regular Parsha making his Torah Motion debut, Rabbi Yishai Abrams from South Africa originally, but will be speaking tonight at 8:30. And I will, and just ahead and ups announcing my regular shiur tomorrow, which will be on the Haggadah, will have a change time. Instead of being 9:15, which I usually do every Friday morning, my shiur tomorrow morning has to be at 8:45 a.m. tomorrow morning. So hope that doesn't inconvenience anybody. And just very briefly, Rabbi Grossman is the principal of Akiva School in Montreal. Here's a amateur chazan, if I can say that. No, amateur chazan, a Bible scholar, a graduate of Yeshivat HaMiftar of Brandeis University, a fellow of the Hartman Institute, and it's a pleasure to welcome back Elijah the Prophet in art, music, life, and the afterlife. Bavakasha, Rabbi Grossman.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kelman. And I just want to check, can everyone both hear me and see the screen? Yes, you see the opening slide. Excellent.
Yes.
So yes, we're going to, in anticipation of the Seder and the visit of Eliyahu, explore Eliyahu himself, as I said, in art, in music, both in his life, in his afterlife, and I'm going to add another parallel as well: a Jew and non-Jew. You will see throughout the lecture a leitmotif of Eliyahu as he is present both in the Jewish and in the non-Jewish world. We will get to that in a moment. But first, let's start with where we will encounter him next week when he comes to visit. And here you have a piece of art depicting the visit of Eliyahu. Since I'm going to be talking about art throughout this lecture, I do lecture on biblical art, and my main source for biblical art is almost entirely Christian artists. Jews famously did not produce a tremendous amount of art, but since non-Jews painted both on what they consider the Old and on the New Testament, we do have a tremendous amount of biblical art from Christian painters, sculptors, who sculpted the Hebrew Bible as well as the New Testament. And much of the art that we're familiar with that we consider to be biblical art is really Christian biblical art, but we can repurpose it for ourselves. Obviously, I had an issue when I wanted to find a painting of Eliyahu appearing at the Seder, because that is not a Christian thing at all, although I'll give a little brief reference to a connection to that in a moment. So I had to go to a Jewish artist. Very, very hard to find Jewish artists. We're going to deal with one a little later on the lecture, but I want to tell you the tremendous difficulty I had in even finding this painting. And it is by an artist, Zalman Kleinman, who passed away, you see, a number of years ago, said a Lubavitcher. And I want to show you the difficulty that Jewish artists, even those that do paint, have in getting any of their work recognized. Here's a Jewish painter. He painted that picture of Eliyahu Hanavi, painted some other pictures. I'll show you another one of his a little later. And there was an appeal to the Jewish Museum in New York to have his paintings housed there after he passed. And there was a letter that was sent to the Jewish Museum. I posted that letter up there, the Jewish Museum in Manhattan, asking them if they would feature Kleinman's work. The Jewish Museum does feature biblical work by non-Jews, but this letter was never answered. The Jewish Museum had no interest in Jewish art by Jewish artists. And till this day, you can find Kleinman's work in Brooklyn, but you will not find it at the Jewish Museum. Chabadniks still revere it. but it is very, very hard to find Jewish art. So I'll be featuring mostly non-Jewish art throughout the lecture. Eliyahu appeared at their Seder. There's Clement's painting, and I like to think of him as the Jewish Santa Claus. This is a function that he plays for our children. Although the real Jewish Santa Claus is, for those of you who raised children, yes, the Jewish Santa Claus is the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy is the Jewish Santa Claus. And when you think about it, the Tooth Fairy for Jews has the same effect that Santa Claus has for non-Jews. This mysterious figure that appears in the middle of the night, delivering gifts that the kids discover the next morning. But Eliyahu fulfills this at the Seder as he appears in the middle of the Seder, and the children are waiting for him. What is interesting is that there is no Talmudic or Midrashic source talking about Eliyahu appearing at the Seder. This is a custom that we do not hear about until very, very late. Nothing in the Gemara about Eliyahu appearing at the Seder. It's not until the 11th century, during the Gaonic period, that Nisim Gaon talks about how his father used to leave the door open during the Seder, and the truth is he really left the door open during the Seder because the night of the Seder, as we all know, is Leil Shimurim. It is a night of watching, and he left the door open because it was a sign that God was watching us, and we did not need the protection of a door in order to be safe. And therefore, Nisim Gaon said that his father used to leave the door open. He also said his father left the door open because at the beginning of the Seder, we say Kol Dichfin, right? Anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat. And it's always a little comical that we invite people to join us at the Seder in the beginning of the Seder, but the door is closed. How is anybody going to come in and join us? And how is anyone even going to hear the invitation? So Rav Nisim Gaon also left the door open, apparently. He said in the name of his father, in order to invite anybody who wants to come in to truly fulfill Kol Dichfin Yitei Ve'echal, so that anybody can join for the meal. However, during the Crusades, the idea of leaving the door open for Eliyahu becomes widespread. That's when we first hear of this custom. It starts in the area of the Crusades in the Rhineland, and then it spreads out throughout the rest of the Jewish world, but is very, very much associated with the Crusades that we first start to hear about leaving the door open for Eliyahu. The generally accepted theory is that because of the terrible slaughter that happened during the Crusades, the hope for the Mashiach was sparked. This idea that we need redemption. Of course, there was always the idea, and that is found in early sources, that the Mashiach would come at Pesach time, since the first redemption happened at Pesach, the final redemption would happen at Pesach as well. It was really during the Crusades that people started to have this messianic furor and really hope for the Mashiach to come and for Eliyahu to arrive Pesach night to announce that that was coming. There's another theory, you don't read about it much, but it is out there. The Crusades were also tied to the blood libels. That's when the blood libels started this idea that Jews were using Christian blood on Pesach night, either for their wine or for their matzah. And there is another theory that we started to leave the door open that night so as to show the Christian neighbors that there was no funny business going on in our homes. That we left the door open to say, see, right, nothing going on here. There's no Christian slaughter. We're using real wine, and there's no blood in the matzahs. But in the 15th century, Zickelman Binga, who is the son-in-law and this also a student of the Maharal MiPrague, introduces this this idea that if Eliyahu does show up on the night of the Seder, he is going to need a glass of wine, because we know from the halacha that even poor people must have wine on the night of Pesach. Certainly, somebody as important as Eliyahu would need what the poorest Jew would need if he showed up for a seder that is a glass of wine. And so, in the 15th century, Zilkman Binga has this idea that we provide a glass of wine for Eliyahu when he arrives, in the instance that he would arrive. And so it is from the 15th century on, we have this idea of the opening of the door being associated with the arrival of Eliyahu and being associated with a glass of wine. That is relatively late. That's in the 15th century. And from then on, we start to see illustrations in the Haggadot of Eliyahu showing up to announce the coming of the Mashiach. And you see, usually it's put in the Haggadah around Shvo Chamatcha, pour out your wrath against the nations. That's usually where it appears. And here you can see Eliyahu in both cases with some form of shofar or trumpet announcing the coming of the Mashiach. And that starts. These are two Haggadot from the 16th century, the Venice Haggadah and the Mantua Haggadahs, with these pictures of Eliyahu showing up. Eliyahu appeared in our consciousness recently on October 7th. At Kibbutz Sad, during the massacres that happened on October 7th, the kibbutz was in a state of panic. They were completely surrounded by terrorists from Gaza. People were being shot. The kibbutz thought that it was going to fall, and they were prepared for the complete slaughter of all the kibbutzniks. And then, out of nowhere, as is told, and you can look up this video if you'd like on YouTube, but there are many, many reiterations of the story. I actually heard the story myself from one of the members of Kibbutz Sad. Out of nowhere, a single tank appeared on the kibbutz, frightened away all of the terrorists who were there on October 7th, right? Killed 70 of the terrorists and saved the kibbutz. This is the story that the members of Kibbutz Sad talk about, of the miraculous salvation on October 7th. What is interesting for our purposes is that the members of the kibbutz called this tank the Eliyahu Hanavi tank. That's how they referred to it. They called it the Eliyahu Hanavi tank. And if you take a look at this video or any other renditions, they will talk about the arrival of the Eliyahu Hanavi tank. And why did they call it the Eliyahu Hanavi tank? Well, for two reasons. One is that it brought salvation, right? It brought saving to the kibbutz, and it came out of nowhere. And these are two features of Eliyahu Hanavi that are consistent over 3,000 years, that Eliyahu Hanavi appears out of nowhere. Again, that's the theme of the Seder, isn't it? He appears out of nowhere, and he appears in order to save, right? He finds us in a bad situation, and he appears in order to save. That's why he's associated with the Messiah. And this is a feature, as I said, it's as recent as October 7th, but it goes back to the original appearance of Eliyahu in the Tanakh. Let's take a look. This is the first time that we encounter Eliyahu Hanavi in the Tanakh. He appears in Sefer Malachim. He appears during the reign of King Ahab, arguably the worst king of the Jewish people ever and in history, and people complain about modern Jewish leadership. You just have to take a look at the Bible. Achav was the worst, bested only by his wife Jezebel, who was even worse than he. And Eliyahu lived during the reign of Achav. And this is the first time we meet Eliyahu. Vayomer Eliyahu ha-tishbi mitoshavei Gilad el Achav Chai Hashem Elokei Israel asher amadti lefanav im yeh hashanim ha'ele tal umatar kim lefi devarai. Eliyahu, Elijah the Tishabite, an inhabitant of Gilad, said to Ahab, to Achav, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding. Eliyahu announces to the king of Israel, this wicked, evil king, that God, as is his wont, is going to punish King Ahav for his wickedness and his wicked reign by withholding rain. I did a shiur for Torah in Motion a while ago about how one of the ways that God indicates his feelings about Israel to us is by withholding precipitation and basically starving us through famine. And that's what Eliyahu says is going to happen to the Jewish people because of their wickedness. Now, I want you to notice something about this first appearance of Eliyahu Hanavi. He appears out of nowhere. When you think about all of the great Jewish leaders, when you think about Abraham, when you think about Moshe, we know their backstories. We know when they were born. We know how they were born. We know who their parents were. We have this whole history of who they were. And Eliyahu, when we meet him as we say in literature, in medias res. In the middle of the story, he literally appears out of nowhere in the Tanakh, and that is his mode. He appears from nowhere. Now, look at other features of this as well. Eliyahu the Tishabite, inhabitant of Gilad, said to Achav, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, etc., etc., etc. Eliyahu here is delivering a prophecy, but notice, when we have a nevuah in Tanakh, usually when we have a prophecy in Tanakh, right, Hashem speaks to the prophet, and then the prophet relays Hashem's message to the Jewish people. Not so here. We have no indication here of Hashem speaking to Eliyahu. Eliyahu speaks on his own in the name of Hashem. He is already semi-divine. Eliyahu has the ability to speak in God's name without God having spoken to him first. And this is also a trope, a theme that will continue throughout the 3,000 years of the Eliyahu Navi story. He has a divinity about himself. He is more than just a prophet. He has a feature that he himself is semi-divine. That's another theme that will continue on. Let's take a look at how the story continues. Vahidavar Hashem elav lemor. The word of the Lord came to him. Leave this place, turn eastward, and go into hiding by the Wadi Sharit, which is east of the Jordan. You will drink from the wadi, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So God says to Eliyahu, "There's going to be this huge famine. Okay, I need you to survive the famine because I need you to be my navi during this famine. So go east, go into hiding. By the way, you also have to go into hiding because the king is going to come and try and kill you. Shoot the messenger was very much taken literally back in the days of the Tanakh. And God says, when you're hiding in the wadi, you will drink from the stream there, okay? And that Hashem has commanded the ravens to feed you. So when Eliyahu appears, right, we talked about the semi-divine, we talked about the appearing out of nowhere. Here you see another feature, and that is miracles. Eliyahu, unlike many other prophets, is associated with miracles. From the first time we meet him, he is going to be the recipient of a miracle, the miracle of being fed by God here through ravens. If the idea of the miracle of being fed by God from heaven sounds familiar, don't worry, we're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we get there, I want to point out that there is something else miraculous here as well. והעורבים מביאים לו לחם ובשר בבוקר, ולחם ובשר בערב, ומן הנחל ישתה. The ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and every evening, and he drank from the wadi. Ravens are also a magical bird. It's not just the miracle of food coming from heaven. Ravens themselves are considered to be magical birds. What is magical about them? What is magical about them is that they speak, they talk. Were I to ask this audience if you know about talking birds, I'm sure most of you would raise your hands. Of course, we know about talking birds. Talking birds are parrots, right? Are parrots. But nobody knew of parrots in the time of the Tanakh, but they did know of magical talking birds, ravens. Ravens were the parrots of the ancient Near East, and people thought of them as miraculous because they could speak. Who knows this? Who knew this? Well, let me tell you somebody who knew this. The person who knew this was none other than Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, when he wrote the poem The Raven, which is a poem about a talking bird, picked the raven because he knew that ravens spoke and decided that he wanted to have a magical bird speaking in his poem. And so he chose a raven. He said he could have chosen a parrot, but he chose a raven instead. Poe, as we'll see, was very affected by the Bible. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this poem. Just a show of hands for those of you on camera. How many of you know of this poem, The Raven, by Edgar Allan Poe? Yeah, pretty famous poem. If you do not know of the poem, I suggest you read it. And if you're not in the mood to read it, and if any of you are fans of the TV show The Simpsons, there is a brilliant rendition of the poem in an episode of the Simpsons. I have here a screenshot from that episode. I highly recommend it for anybody who's interested. It's a beautiful rendition that's very, very funny. Let me read to you some of the poem. Edgar Allan Poe, writing in 1809 to 1849 during his lifetime. Open here I flung the shutter, when many a flirt and flutter. In there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mane of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. And those of you who know the poem know that the refrain is, quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay, so that's the theme of the poem. But have any of you paid attention to this verse? Prophet, said I, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, is there balm in Gilad? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, never more. What prophet is Edgar Allan Poe referring to? None other than the prophet Elijah, than the prophet Eliyahu. First of all, there's a connection with the raven, right? Edgar Allan Poe certainly knew this connection, right? The desert land is where Eliyahu escapes to in order to avoid the famine. That's where God tells him to go to. And as we read in the quote, where is Eliyahu from? He is from Gilad. That's where he comes from. That's what we read in the beginning. And Poe is certainly making a reference here to Eliyahu. Poe, who is not Jewish, as I said, Eliyahu is important to Jews and non-Jews. What is Poe doing writing about Eliyahu in the 19th century? Why is this happening? And by the way, it's not just him. Washington Alston, who also lived around that time. Famous painter. If any of you have been to the Boston area, I lived in Boston for 5 years. No, one of the outer cities of Boston is Allston, Massachusetts. It's named after this painter, Washington Allston. And here he is painting that famous story of Eliyahu and the ravens. You see it here, and I showed you a little detail. There's Eliyahu being fed by the raven. At the same time that Edgar Allan Poe is writing about Eliyahu in his poem *The Raven*, Alston is painting Eliyahu and the raven. This, by the way, was the very first painting that was acquired by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. If any of you have visited that museum, one of the great art museums in the world, certainly one of the greatest in the United States. This was its very first acquisition. Was this painting? So it wasn't just important to Alston, wasn't just important to Poe. It was important to Americans at that time. And why is it important to Americans at that time? Because there were sightings of Eliyahu Hanavi during that time in the United States. No one less than John Smith, the founder of Mormonism, in 1836, believes that Eliyahu Hanavi has appeared to him and has revealed himself to him here in the United States. And why? You see, this is shortly after the founding of America, founding the United States, which was regarded by its founders as the New Jerusalem, the redemption of the New World, right? And of course, who would announce the redemption of the New World? Who would announce the New Jerusalem? Of course, it would be Eliyahu Hanavi. So it is no coincidence that shortly after the founding of the United States, Eliyahu Hanavi starts making appearances as well here in the United States. And by the way, he will continue to appear and disappear throughout human history. And there's also a theory, I told you he's from Gilad. We saw that in the book of Kings, but he's also called Eliyahu ha-Tishbi, which is confusing because it sounds like he comes from a place called Tashav or Tishbi, but we were told he's from Gilad. One of the theories is Tishbi is from the root Toshav, meaning a temporary dweller. What Avraham says to Hamor, for instance, in Parshat Chayesara, Gervit Toshav Ani, right? I am a temporary dweller here. So Tishbi, Eliyahu Tishbi may refer to the fact that he is only in a place for a short period of time. He moves from place to place. We spoke earlier about the idea that Eliyahu was fed by the heavens. He was fed by food coming down from heaven. And of course, that reminds us of the stories of the Israelites following the Exodus from Egypt. Following the Exodus from Egypt, we were also fed from heaven. We were fed bread from heaven in the form of the man. We were fed slav. We were fed quail from the heavens, and you see how the Eliyahu story combines both the ideas of bread from heaven and the idea of birds coming down from heaven to feed us. So you see the Eliyahu Hanavi story immediately connects us back to the story of of Yetziat Mitzrayim and the Exodus. No coincidence, Eliyahu appears on Pesach. From his very beginnings, he is associated with the story of the Exodus. And that's not all. When you really think about Eliyahu's story, you see how many connections there are to the Exodus. First, the idea of a wicked king. Eliyahu has Achav. We of course have Paro. We talked about the dew uh, that God was going to withhold along with the rain. And of course, Pesach is the time that we hope for dew. That's why we bench tal. We say the prayer for the dew. And that's when the rain stops and the dew starts. So Pesach is the transition between rain and dew. The idea that Eliyahu's story takes place in the wilderness, in the midbar, just like the story of the Exodus. And the entire story of Eliyahu takes place on the eastern side of the Jordan River, which is exactly where Bnei Israel were at the end of the Exodus before they left Egypt. These paintings, by the way, are by James Tissot. James Tissot, who was a Christian painter, he did beautiful, beautiful watercolors. I have a whole lecture on Tissot. I'm not going to speak about him now. I only mention him because all of his paintings. He was a born again Christian, but all of his paintings are housed at the Jewish Museum in New York. That same museum that would not accept Zalman Kleinman's paintings from the Jewish Chabadnik painting, the Jewish Museum in New York houses all of James Tissot's watercolors of the Bible. How they got there is an amazing story, which I will, please God, have the opportunity at some point to lecture about. But I'm a big fan of Tissot's, and I will feature some of his paintings, like this one. Here is the story of Eliyahu running in front of the chariot of Achav. So that is King Ahab, the wicked King Ahab. And you see Eliyahu running in front of his chariot. And of course, this image here is completely evocative of the Israelites fleeing from Pharaoh on his chariot, right? In fact, had I not told you that this was a picture of Eliyahu and Achav, and I told you it was a biblical picture, I'm sure most of you would have said, oh, well, that must be the Israelites, Moshe fleeing from Paro's chariots. But it's not, it's Eliyahu. In fact, the story of Eliyahu very much follows the story of Moshe. Like Moshe, Eliyahu fled from a wicked king, just like Moshe fled from Paro. Eliyahu fled from Achav. Eliyahu wanders in the wilderness when he is fleeing. He wanders until he encounters a bush. Eliyahu and Moshe both wander in the wilderness until they encounter a bush. Moshe, of course, the famous burning bush. Eliyahu, it's a type of bush called a broom bush. And Eliyahu, just like Moshe, ends up at Har Sinai. By the way, fun fact, Eliyahu is the last person in the Tanakh ever to visit Har Sinai. But he has that in common with Moshe. Their lives parallel each other very much. So Eliyahu wanders in the wilderness, gets to the bush, then makes his way off to Mount Sinai. When he arrives at Mount Sinai, again, these are all paintings by Tissot. When he arrives at Mount Sinai, God reveals himself to him, just like God revealed himself to Moshe and the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. God revealed himself to Eliyahu at Mount Sinai. But instead of welcoming him to Mount Sinai, God says to Eliyahu, what are you doing here? Very strange greeting. Moshe was really welcomed by God to Har Sinai, told to come back, right? God says to Eliyahu, what's up? What are you doing here? And Eliyahu says, I'm here because I'm zealous. I'm a zealous person. I'm zealous for you, oh God. I'm a defender of you. I defend you to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are a sinning people. The Jewish people break your covenant. The Jewish people don't do the right thing. I am a zealous person, and I defend you to the Jewish people. Now, this is very different from Moshe. You'll remember when Moshe was at Mount Sinai, the Jews had just committed the sin of the golden calf, and Moshe defended the Jewish people to God. Eliyahu does the opposite. Eliyahu is the prosecutor of the Jewish people, and says to God, "I'm on your side against the Jewish people who are disobeying you." The Midrash tells us God's response. This is from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Leolam ata mekaneh. Elijah had said that I was very zealous, and God says, "You're always very zealous." As it is written, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Bekan ata mekaneh. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron the priest, turned my wrath away from the children of Israel in that he was zealous. God says to Eliyahu, I know you're a zealous person because it says about you that you are a zealous person in the Torah. It says, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron the priest, turned away my wrath. That was when Pinchas, who was Aaron's grandson, was zealous for God and with his own sword as a vigilante, killed two people who were in the midst of a terrible, terrible sin, right? And God was pleased with Pinchas for being such a zealot. Weird. Why is God addressing Eliyahu as Pinchas? Eliyahu, it turns out, is a shapeshifter as well. When Eliyahu appears and disappears, he disappears and reappears in different forms and in different guises. He can take on the look and the personality of different people throughout history. And the rabbis are telling us, Eliyahu actually existed back in the days of the Torah in the form of Pinchas. They were the same person. Eliyahu's powers, his magical powers, extend beyond just time travel. When he travels in time, he can appear as different people in different forms. Turns out we already met him in the Torah in the form of Pinchas. You'll see this will continue throughout the history of Eliyahu. But then God says something further. God says, I'm not so happy about how zealous you are with the Jewish people, right? And how you always say that the Jewish people break my covenant. In fact, the Jewish people are my people. I don't like you criticizing the Jewish people. I liked what Moshe did, defending the Jewish people. The Jewish people do keep my covenant. I don't need you to be this adversary against the Jewish people. The Jewish people keep my covenant. And I'm going to prove that to you. Throughout history, the Jewish people, God says, are always going to keep my covenant, right? And because you miserable person, because you claim that they don't keep my covenant, every time the Jewish people reaffirm my covenant, I want you there to witness it, to see how wrong you were. And so God says to Eliyahu, every time, right? Chayecha, she'ein Yisrael osim brit milah ad she'ata ro'eh beinecha. I swear, the Jews shall not observe the covenant of circumcision until you witness it with your own eyes. God says to Eliyahu, as a punishment to you, okay, to prove that I was right, that the Jews are going to keep my covenant, every time there is a Brit Milah, you are going to be there. And as you know, whenever there is a Brit Milah, we have a place, a Kisei Shel Eliyahu. We have a chair for Eliyahu. It's all because of this midrash, God's revenge against Eliyahu Hanavi. And that's why we have discussed it. Mikan hitkinu chachamim shiu osin moshav kavod lamelach habrit. Hence, the sages instituted the custom that the people should have a seat of honor for Eliyahu, which we have till today. Till today, Eliyahu appears at every bris, and we have a special chair for him. As a piece of art for this, I want to just feature here this beautiful Kisei Shel Eliyahu, chair of Eliyahu. This one was made at the Betzalel School, which was founded in Jerusalem in 1906. It still exists today. It's a little bit down from the Shuk in Yerushalayim. And they spent many, many years at the Betzalel School making a Zionist Kisei Shel Eliyahu. It's also the biblical imagery, but this particular Kisei Shel Eliyahu is filled with Zionist imagery. And of course, why did they want Zionist imagery in the Kisei Shel Eliyahu? Because he was going to announce the redemption, the founding of the state of Israel. So they wanted the Kisei Shel Eliyahu to also be evocative of him announcing the founding of the state of Israel, since we know that Eliyahu will announce the final redemption. By the way, something else to point out about the bris. No coincidence that Eliyahu appears at a bris and at a seder. The bris and the seder, are two rituals that are very, very much related. Okay. First of all, you cannot observe the seder unless you have a bris. Right? That's one of the laws of Pesach. You can't participate in Pesach unless you have a bris, so they're connected that way. They're the only two positive mitzvot, the only two positive commandments for which you get karet are for not doing a brit and not observing the Pesach. Those are the only two. Every other karet is for a negative commandment. Those are the only two we get a karet. All right. So the question is, though, how is he going to be able to attend every Brit Milah? That sounds like an impossibility. The only way that Eliyahu could attend every Brit Milah ever in Jewish history is if he's alive forever. And indeed, that is true of Eliyahu. Eliyahu is the only Jew in the Tanakh who never dies. It's the only Jew who never dies. There's one other person in Tanakh who doesn't die. Not our topic for today, but he's not Jewish. But Eliyahu is the only Jew who never dies, and that is what allows him to time travel, because he never died. We read about this also in Sefer Melachim. Here's what we're told. Eliyahu has been told by God that his time on earth is up, and Eliyahu confides to his assistant. His assistant's name is Elisha. By the way, another parallel that Eliyahu has with Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu had Joshua as an assistant, Eliyahu has Elisha as an assistant. Eliyahu confides in his assistant Elisha that he is going to die, and they're walking together, and Ushneim Amdu Al Yarden. As they're walking, they come to the Jordan River. Vaikach Eliyahu et Adarto. Elijah took his mantle, he took his coat, and rolling it up, he struck the water. It divided to the right and the left, so the two of them crossed on dry land. Sound familiar, right? Eliyahu seems to be here a reincarnation of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Just like Moshe Rabbeinu crossed the Yam Suf, right, and split it in two, so too Eliyahu crosses the Yam Suf and splits it in two. So we see Eliyahu again reappearing over and over again in history as Pinchas, as Moshe. Here's a beautiful drawing of Tissot of the Israelites crossing the river after it's split. So we also have Eliyahu doing the same, crossing the river and making it split. The story continues. As they kept on walking and talking, a fiery chariot, Rechav Eish, with fiery horses suddenly appeared and separated one from the other, that is, Eliyahu from Elisha. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw it, and he cried out, "O Father, Father, Israel's chariots and rider. Avi, Avi, Rechav Yisrael ufarashav." And that's the last we hear of Eliyahu in this story. Eliyahu gets swept up to heaven in a chariot of fire. It was the title of a movie many, many years ago. And the significance is he is given a ride up to heaven, but he never dies. And he remains in heaven, and he can come back down to earth at any point, because he is the only Jew who doesn't die. That's how we can come to our seders. That's how we can come to our brit milahs. That's how he can reappear in different forms, because he never died. I told you I would talk about one Jewish artist. If you're going to talk about one Jewish artist, I mean, famous Jewish artist, I know I introduced you to Zalman Kleiman, but no one knew about him. But when we're talking about famous Jewish artists, of course, we all think about Chagall, who was the Jewish artist. And Chagall painted a famous painting of Eliyahu being carried off to heaven, the story we just read. And he painted that. Why? Chagall had a very, very rough life. He was in Russia following the Bolshevik Revolution. He had to flee to Paris. He then went to the United States. He then returned to France. He had a very, very tumultuous life. He was very, very affected by everything that had happened in Europe, and he was very, very obsessed with the idea of the redemption. And he was, of course, obsessed with surrealism. That was his painting style. And of course, what more surreal a character do we have in the Tanakh than Eliyahu Hanavi? So it's no coincidence that Chagall, who was both obsessed with the idea of the redemption and of surrealism, chooses to paint Eliyahu. And on the right there, you have his famous picture of the fiddler on the roof, which was indeed the inspiration for both the story and the the famous play, which became a famous movie. And if you've seen the movie or if you've seen the play, everyone wonders who is this mysterious fiddler on the roof. And I'm going to suggest this mysterious fiddler on the roof is none other than Eliyahu Hanavi. Who else would be a mysterious figure that suddenly appears on the roof? He was very much on Chagall's mind. I have no proof for this whatsoever. This is my own theory, but I think it fits in very well with Chagall, with his obsession about Eliyahu and about a mysterious figure who suddenly appears again when Jews are suffering. He suddenly appears out of nowhere. And of course, he has a violin, right, when he's playing. And what on earth would the fiddler on the roof be playing? I have a theory about that. I think he's playing Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. I think he's playing Eliyahu's song, which we will talk about in a few moments. But we're not quite there yet. Eliyahu, I said, the last we hear of Eliyahu in the Tanakh on earth is that story when he gets swept up into the whirlwind. However, there are two other references to Eliyahu in the Tanakh that I want to familiarize yourself with. One of them you are familiar with, I imagine. If not, you will be very, very soon, because we read it on Shabbat Hagadol. Shabbat Hagadol, which, as you know, is coming up, gets its name from this verse from Malachi. Malachi is the Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol, and the Haftarah ends, Hinei anochi sholech lachem et Eliyah hanavi lifnei bo yom Hashem hagadol v'hanora. Lo, I will send the prophet Eliyahu to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of God. Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol, the great, the great. That's how Shabbat Hagadol gets its name, from this word Gadol. Great, in this, awesome, in this verse. And the prophet Malachi, who is the very, very last of all of the prophets, the prophet Malachi says, before the great and awesome day of the Lord, in other words, the time of the Mashiach, when the redemption comes, before that, I am going to send you Eliyahu Hanavi. And it is from this verse that we read on Shabbat HaGadol that we get the idea that Eliyahu is going to come before the Mashiach comes and announce the coming of the Mashiach. That is in this coming Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol. This is where we get the idea of Eliyahu announcing the redemption. That's a pasuk many people are familiar with. What most people are not familiar with, that was the inspiration for this shiur, because I mentioned the book of Chronicles to Rabbi Kelman, and the fact that nobody except me reads the book of Chronicles. There is a fascinating reference to Eliyahu Hanavi in Divrei Hayamim, in the book of Chronicles. The context is not really that important. As I said, there were many wicked kings of Israel. I told you Achav was the worst, but King Yehoram of Yehuda, King Joram, was not great either. And God, as he often does, sends messages to wicked kings of Israel saying bad stuff is going to happen to you. So we read in Divrei Hayamim, V'emer elav michtav mi Eliyahu, hanavi lemar komar Hashem Elokei David avicha, tachad asher lo halachta bidrachai, Yoshafat avicha, etc., etc. A letter from Elijah the prophet came to King Yoram of Judah, which read, Thus says the Lord, the God of your father David, since you have not followed the practices of your father Yehoshaphat, you'll be punished, etc., etc. Okay, who cares? Why is this pasuk of any significance? First of all, those of you who are familiar with the Panovich Yeshiva might know Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, whose book is called Michtav Me Eliyahu, which is taken from this verse. It has nothing to do with this verse, but he just named since his name was Eliyahu, named the book after this verse. But why is this verse significant? Who cares that Eliyahu sends a letter to the king? What is significant is that at the time of King Yehoram, okay, Eliyahu is no longer on earth. Eliyahu is long gone from earth. So what's significant about this verse is that Eliyahu is sending letters to kings of Israel when he is supposedly dead. Not, we know he's not dead, but when he is no longer on earth. So this verse from Chronicles proves that Eliyahu stays in touch with the earth even after he is gone. Eliyahu appears even after the Tanakh. He appears during the period of the Talmud as well. There is a Gemara in Masechet Brachot, early in Masechet Brachot, that says that there is a law, there's a halacha that you're not allowed to pray behind a shul. The halacha that if the shul is davening, if everybody's davening, you're not allowed to have a personal break-off minyan. You can't daven by yourself behind the shul, because it's saying I reject the shul, right? I'm going to do my own thing. That's the whole speech on break-off minyanim, but not for us today. But that's in the Gemara. And the Gemara recounts that there's this one guy who does just that. The Gemara in Brachot says this is one guy who does just that, right? The whole shul is davening, He makes his own break-off minyan. He davens behind the shul. And the Gemara says, Eliyahu Hanavi appears in the form of an Arab and just murders him, just cuts him down right there for the sin of making a break-off minyan. A bit of a warning there. Very much we know of Eliyahu the zealot, right? Very much like Pinchas with his sword, right? Very interesting already at the time of the Gemara, when Eliyahu has to appear as a murderous character, it chooses an Arab. I will leave that aside. This is not a political lecture, but that's what the Gemara says. But we see that Eliyahu is able to appear in various forms. There's another wild Gemara about Eliyahu appearing. Rabbi Meir's sister-in-law, Rabbi Meir, who lived during the time of the Roman persecutions, Rabbi Meir's sister-in-law gets in trouble with the Romans, and she is carried off and taken to a Roman brothel. Rabbi Meir's wife says to Rabbi Meir, go rescue my sister. And Rabbi Meir goes, and he goes into the brothel, and he rescues his sister-in-law. The Romans then put a bounty on his head, right? Rabbi Meir wanted dead or alive, and the Romans spot him. Right? They spot Rabbi Meir, and they go to kill Rabbi Meir for having rescued his sister-in-law from the brothel. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Eliyahu Hanavi appears as a prostitute and starts canoodling with Rabbi Meir, and the Roman authorities say, oh, that can't possibly be Rabbi Meir. Must have been a case of mistaken identity. Rabbi Meir would never be seen with a prostitute, and they let him go. And Rabbi Meir's life is saved by Eliyahu Hanavi, who appears this time in the guise of a prostitute. He can be a woman as a woman as well. He can be a prostitute. He can be a prostitute. Crazy story. Crazier still, because I think it might have been an inspiration for this painting. This painting by Leonardo da Vinci is of Eliyahu in the wilderness. The story we talked about, where he's in the wilderness. Here he's visited by an angel. This is when he's sleeping under the bush. And I always found it interesting that Leonardo da Vinci, this was the one biblical scene from the Old Testament he decides that he wants to paint. What inspires him to paint Eliyahu Hanavi? I wonder if he was familiar with that story of Eliyahu appearing as a prostitute. What gives me this theory? Leonardo da Vinci himself was the son of a prostitute. Da Vinci means of the city of Vinci. He was born from his father and a prostitute. And we also discovered recently that Leonardo da Vinci was actually Jewish, and his mother was sold into sex slavery. It was a terrible story. That's how she ended up in Italy, because of the sex slave trade. And this great scholar, Carlo Vecchi, published on this topic just a few years ago. So it would not surprise me that Leonardo, who had a very deep sympathy for the fact that he had Jewish lineage, that he was born of a prostitute, would have connected the story of Eliyahu and been inspired to Eliyahu, as I said, appears in heaven and on earth. He is something that we call a liminal character, meaning he appears between two separate places. That's why he appears during the Exodus, between Egypt and Israel. That's why he appears at the bris at the time of life, and he also appears at another moment, which is Havdalah. Havdalah, here's another Zalman Kleiman painting. Eliyahu appears at Havdalah because it is also a transitional moment. This a transition between Shabbat and Chol, and it is at that time that we sing the Eliyahu Hanavi song, Eliyahu Hanavi, a song that appears out of nowhere. Everybody knows this song, but nobody knows where the song came from. It appeared out of nowhere sometime in the 19th century. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and Jewish musicologists have been simply unable to trace it, and that does not surprise me. That does not surprise me at all, because like Eliyahu, it appears out of nowhere. Skip that. And I want to finish with one more musical thing. As I said, Eliyahu is both a character, as I said, between different places, between heaven and earth, between Egypt and Israel, between life and death, between Jew and non-Jew, and the great composer Felix Mendelssohn composed a famous setting that he called Eliyahu. And why did Mendelssohn do so? I think very much because Mendelssohn himself identified with Eliyahu. Mendelssohn, who was born Jewish but then baptized as a Lutheran when he was 7 years old, also thought of himself very much as between two worlds, between the Jewish world and between the Christian world. He felt that he didn't really belong to either, but in a certain sense, belonged to both. And he composed a score for Eliyahu's story. And it's something some of you might have heard this in the concert hall. What I think is quite beautiful was that it was also set to music for Friday night by Charles Solomon. Charles Solomon, who was the organist at the West London Synagogue, felt that just like Shabbat ends with the song of Eliyahu Hanavi in Havdalah, Shabbat should also begin with a song of Eliyahu Hanavi. And so what Charles Solomon did was he took part of Mendelssohn's composition, and he set it to the Friday night davening so that we would have a little bit of Eliyahu Hanavi at the beginning of Shabbat, just like we have at the end of Shabbat. And so I want to end by playing for you. Hopefully the sound will work. Charles Solomon's setting of Eliyahu Hanavi for the Friday night service, taken from Felix Mendelssohn.
Hashem Malach for Friday evening, tuned by Mendelssohn. Adonai Malach Geut Labesh Adonai Mositazah.
Anyway, you can listen to the rest of it. Did that come through? Did you guys hear that? Were you able to hear? Yes, excellent.
Yes.
And so you see, Eliyahu appears throughout Jewish history, takes on different forms. Moses, Pinchas, can appear as an Arab, he can appear as a prostitute, he can appear as a beggar. We never know where he will appear or when he will appear, but we hope that he appears to us this Pesach, announcing the coming of the Mashiach. And with that, I wish all of you a very, very happy and kosher Pesach, Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And I thank you for joining me on this exploration of Eliyahu Hanavi.
Thank you very much.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. תודה רבה.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. That was great.
My pleasure. I'm open to any questions if you have.
So can I ask you, hi, this is Sandra from New York. So you mentioned that Eliyahu was the one biblical character who never died. So how do we reconcile that with the fact that we know that, for instance, Daniel, it doesn't ever say anywhere where Daniel dies. We know that Rebecca, the only way we know she died is we have an implication because her maid died. And Sarah Barasher, I don't know that she died. So what makes Eliyahu, the sort of super undied, eternal, forever character that, and you've done that so incredibly well with us and shown us that. But how does that distinguish? How does Eliyahu's not dying? How is that distinguished from the other characters where their deaths are also not recorded or mentioned?
Right. So what I would say with the two characters and the other character, the non-Jew is Enoch,
Yes.
who is pre-Jewish, right? He lived before Avram. That's why he's not Jewish. With both Eliyahu and with Hanoch, we have reports of their last appearance on Earth, right, and of their disappearance from Earth. With all the other cases that you mentioned, we simply don't have a record of their death, but we don't have a record of most things in the Tanakh. I always people. Yeah, this is something that's always important to point out. We have in the Tanakh a tiny, tiny fraction of everything that happened during the biblical period. You can only report so much, so it makes sense that many things are not reported. But only in this but it's only in this case, right, that we're specifically told of their last appearance on Earth, and specifically told that did not end.
That's great. Thank you. That really helps. I was puzzling that one. No, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful class.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Does anyone else have any question? Okay. So if there are no other questions,
I have one here. My name is Gabi Keston, also from New York. We refer to Eliyahu as Zachor Latov, like remembering him as being good, as being truthful. Are we only remembering him, or as if like he's still alive, or what is like inside of like Zachor Latov?
Yes, that we Zachor Latov, remembering him in a positive way for all of the positive things, for all the goodness that he does and continues to do. Whenever he comes, he brings goodness. He brings goodness with him, and I think specifically we say that because you see his personality in the early stories is really quite violent, right? He has really quite a sharp, almost nasty side to him, which is what God gets a little upset about. So I think the Zachor Latov, among other reasons, is to remind us of the fact that with all that, right, our memory of him is the goodness. So there are other interpretations, but I'll offer that.
I wonder whether Zachor Latov is a word play for Zachar, male, and is why we invite him to the Brit, because of Zachor Latov. Zecher Zachar, as in Shabbat Zachar, the word play.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. All right. I wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.